Good morning. It's Mamaw Yates, and I want to talk to you today about how you can check your work on Task 1, Prompt 5. Now, I'll be using today the Elementary Literacy Handbook, but don't let that bother you too much. Everybody's Prompt 5 and Rubric 5 are very similar, except for world language. Uh, their Prompt 5 is actually Prompt 4 and Rubric 4. So it's just a matter of not thinking about the same subject-specific emphasis, but the goal of the prompt is the same. So I'm just using that today to get us started. Okay, so this is the prompt, and it's called Monitoring Student Learning. And in this, it says describe how you planned formal and informal assessments will provide direct evidence that students can use the essential literacy strategy to comprehend or compose text and related skills throughout this learning segment. Now, that's a complex sentence. And so the best way to work with a complex sentence is to break it down in parts. And we'll look at that in a minute. And the other thing is for you to describe or explain how the design or adaptations of your assessments allow students with specific needs to demonstrate their learning. So the major basic, this comes from the URLP, the Understanding Rubric Level Progressions. So the guiding question here has to do with the alignment of the assessments to the standards and objectives and the extent to which assessments provide multiple forms of evidence to monitor student progress throughout the learning segment. So not just at the end. Spoiler alert. You can't just give assessment at the end. And then required adaptations in the IEP and 504 plans that you have for your students. So obviously, did you follow them is the question. The assessment that they talk about, instead of referring to formative and summative assessments, EdTPA assumes that all of your assessments, except probably at the very end, would be considered formative. Even a quiz would be considered formative, or a project considered formative, because they are helping you make decisions on how to monitor your instruction, how to plan your instruction, what needs to be done. So that's the definition of formative. So they're assuming that all of your assessments are formative, but they have put in the formative two subcategories of informal and formal. This is something that not all programs have talked about, and it is a point of confusion for some of the students that I've worked with. So informal, think about something that you could not show to a parent. For example, you're asking questions in a class. In your mind, you've got evidence, but that's not enough to show a parent. Students thumb up, thumbs down, clickers, all those types of things that you use. Unless it's collecting data, it's not something that you can show a parent. So those informal assessments are important for your instruction, but they aren't something you could show a parent. So anything else that would give you a tangible piece of evidence, either a virtual piece of evidence or a hard copy paper piece of evidence, those are considered formal. Don't equate formal with summative, because formals can also be bell work, they can be exit slips. In other words, it's just a piece of paper that you use for evidence. Now, once we have those definitions out of the way, Let's look at the rubric. The rubric is very clear here that you have to provide evidence to monitor students' use of the essential literacy strategy and related skills. Now, for everybody else in all the other handbooks, you're going to have your subject-specific emphasis, which would be in your level 3. So everybody has to look at their own handbooks to see what the difference is in these bulleted. That's just what this says for literacy. And then for level 4, not just provide evidence, but provide multiple forms of evidence. Now, what they mean by that is not 15 types of bell work. Bell work would be considered one form of evidence. Exit slip would be one form of evidence. But you need to switch up stuff. So if you had them write you could use exit slips. I just mean that if you're using the same kind of exit slip. But for example, if the exit slip on day 1 was to have them fill out a TWL chart, or to fill out a graphic organizer, then on day 2 you had them write a little paragraph. On day 3, if you had them do something different. So it's just, different requirements that use different skills. So one student might do great at completing the graphic organizer, but not so well with the paragraph. So that gives multiple different types of opportunities for students to do well on your assessment. And then with level 5, to get that, you have to have 4. You have to have met 4. And then on top of it, you have assessments that have been strategically designed. Strategically designed. Assessments that are strategically designed. Those are your key words here. To allow individuals or groups with specific needs to demonstrate their learning. So, for example, you have a student who cannot complete 10 math problems. Designing that to where you've cut down the number and actually showing evidence that you've done that, that's one way to modify an assignment. You can modify an assignment through its content, it's the way that the content is presented. So there's different ways to modify. So here is a checklist that you can use. First of all, if you'll notice from your rubric here, level 1, we have an automatic 1 if you do not pay attention to any assessment requirements in IEPs and 504 plans. So what the scorer is going to do is they're going to go look at your context for learning. And they're going to see, okay, they noted that this student has an IEP, and that IEP requires that the test be read aloud, or the assessment. And maybe there was a 504 plan. But we're talking about plans that are specific to assessment. So you have to, in your, when you write prompt 5, you want to make sure that you have explicitly addressed any kind of assessment requirements that you noted in your context for learning. If you don't, that's an automatic 1, no matter how good the rest of it is. Okay, so it's very important that you double check that. You want to make sure that your planned assessments provide evidence of student use of the essential literacy strategy at various points throughout the learning segment. So the beginning, middle, and the end of lessons would be various points. You want to make sure that it's throughout the learning segment. So throughout each day, you want to be checking that evidence. Same thing for related skills. Now, for those of you not in the literacy handbook, this would be substituted with your own subject-specific emphasis that you can see on your Rubric 5. Assessments must provide evidence on how students use both the essential literacy strategy and the related skills. Both, not one or the other. So you need to pay attention to that. There have to be multiple forms of evidence to do better than a 3. Multiple forms. So think about that. Do I have multiple forms of evidence? Not just the same kind of evidence that's collected at a different time or a different setting, but multiple forms of evidence. And of course, that evidence would be to monitor their development of your strategy and related skills. And if you're not in the literacy handbook, that would be your own subject-specific emphasis. You want to describe how the assessments are targeted and explicit in order to allow individuals or groups with specific needs. So when you have, you need to describe how you have modified assessments, how you have accommodated students with specific needs so that they have equal access to doing well on this assignment. Now, that's important. Having differentiated work is about providing equal access to doing well in your class. It's very important. You want to include a modified assessment in your assessment file. This demonstrates to the scorer that you not only can but did create a modified assessment, and you should describe how that assessment is targeted to help a specific student or group of students and how it is explicitly designed for a specific reason. Now, there's some ways to organize your information before you get started. You can list all of your informal assessments that you have throughout your learning segment. Put the lesson numbers, and that way you can self-check about how to self-check to make sure that they are throughout. Put the strategy that they are supporting or the skill. Same with your formal assessments. So this is a good way to self-check, and I would recommend doing that. Here's my suggestion for writing the first prompt, 5A, I mean. Describe, not identify. Don't just name them, describe them. So don't just say, I've got an exit ticket. Describe the exit ticket. And then say, found on page 1 of my assessments file, or found on page 3 of my assessments file. Or if it's if the evidence is just describing your lesson plan, you can say, look on lesson plan day 3, so that you are pointing the scorer to the evidence to where this stuff is. Then you want to discuss how they are helping you assess the essential literacy strategy and each related skills. For those of you not in literacy, you would put in your own subject-specific emphasis here. And then do the same thing with your formal assessments. 5B, you'll want to reference your context for learning. I would suggest describing it this way. Describe the adaptations that you've made to your assessments that you made for special groups, and adaptations to your assessments that you make for individuals. Be specific, point to evidence in your lesson plans, point to evidence in your assessment file. So keep up the good work. I'm sure you're doing great. A lot of this information that I've used today comes from this Understanding Rubric Level Progressions document. Everyone's got one. A lot of you don't use them. I can't understand why, because it literally tells you how to write this thing and what the scorers are looking for. It is for candidate support. So it's not against the rules for you to use it. They expect you to be using it. So until next time, bye.